My name is Shalini Le Gall. I'm the Curator of Academic Programs at the Colby College Museum of Art in Waterville, Maine, which most times I've had to talk, people go, oh, Maine, it's so cold. And I realize this is one of the rare occasions where nobody is going to have that reaction. I'm delighted to speak to you today about the work we've done at the museum in relationship to environmental studies and climate change. Our museum has a really strong collection of American and contemporary art and a vibrant program of temporary exhibitions. And as the Curator of Academic Programs, I work with a broad range of faculty and classes to integrate this collection, these exhibitions, these programs, into as much teaching and learning that happens on campus that I can possibly reach. We are a very much brick-dominated campus, and our pavilion here, as you see, is very much not in that style, very modern, very contemporary, with this kind of vibrant silhouette, kind of visible from the streetscape. So we are often described on campus as the beacon of light, because physically we are. The college has also a robust program in environmental studies. We have a number of faculty in all disciplines interested in environmental questions, eco-criticism, issues related to the natural world. And in this presentation, I'm going to share a couple of case studies, including information on class visits, faculty and student research, and close object study, in the hopes of contributing to an ongoing discussion about how the Academic Art Museum can best respond to the growing and panicked community of visitors thinking about the environment and climate change. At the museum, we work with about 100 classes annually. About 25% of those, so about a quarter of those from year to year, are art and art history classes. So that means the other 75 are really faculty who are really working in very strongly interdisciplinary ways that were not part of their training, right? That were not part of their understanding of their discipline. And so you'll see how that has meant that we needed to have a certain kind of flexibility. At Colby, the Center for the Arts and Humanities offers faculty resources to create what are called humanities lab courses. These courses are often in relationship to an annual theme in which an active model of learning is incorporated into a specific class or session. As part of such a lab course for the recent theme Human Nature, biology professor Kat Collins created an ecology lab in which she asked her students to evaluate the validity of using landscape representations as data on species diversity in specific geographical areas. So the graphs pictured here show the results of students looking at the ecological variation represented in works of art. I am not an ecologist, but this is the part where I pretend to be an ecologist and point out to you these are names of specific paintings in the collection, and this is the way that students have defined species diversity as represented in these historical landscape paintings. Most of them are East Coast, United States. We have a teaching gallery where we were able to install a lot of these works are in storage. We get to install all of these works in our teaching gallery. And one of the first questions that these students asked, and you can see him here right up there with the ruler, where they said, what's our area of study? What's our defined area of study? Because when we go out into the woods, that's the first question we ask ourselves. What's the defined area of study? So how are we going to decide that here? And so they were asking questions that I think art historians and curators sometimes ask, but it's probably not the first thing we ask ourselves, which is, what's the space represented in this painting? Is this 20 feet? Is this 2 miles? Is this, how do I geographically map this out? And what's the latitude and longitude of this area? What's the expected species diversity that I would kind of expect to find here? So a really kind of challenging and interesting way to think about what, is landscape painting kind of in a very conservative framework. So to conduct this class, we drafted learning goals for the sessions in ways that addressed both art history and ecology. So we asked, what assumptions did you make during your data collection? What aspects of each painting make ecological sense? That's the one that I think was the hardest for all of the museum staff to understand. How can a work of art make ecological sense? Or what does it mean for a work of art to make ecological sense? And how do artistic conventions influence ecological patterns or our ability to see them, right? And this comes back to the question, actually, Christina, you and I were just talking about this, about visual biases, right? What are the questions that are that rise immediately to our mind when we encounter something visual, and how do we make ourselves aware of those biases, right? And kind of work around them. Sorry, back to the talk. Okay, so we installed our teaching gallery with a wide range of objects, and students were charged with establishing a hypothesis and then developing data sets to test their claims. So what artworks will fall into my data set and what artworks will not. We spoke about artistic conventions, compositional choices, as well as ecological fieldwork, the metrics for evaluating diversity. And the interaction brought their scientific methodology into the museum, but it also highlighted the subjective processes at work at scientific methods. So they started also becoming aware of the fact that an artist, when sitting down to paint a scene, is asking themselves very similar questions. What are the borders? What are the edges? What's going to fall in? What isn't? The following semester, a very ambitious student from this ecology lab, Martha Holland, asked to continue this inquiry in an independent study, with Professor Collins and I both supervising her project. Martha was very fortunate to have had coursework in both biology and art history, and one of her central objects of study was this painting by Virgil Williams of Mount Katahdin, which is a site in Baxter State Park in Maine that marks the northern point of the Appalachian Trail. So during our discussions of this work, I often raised issues around composition and form, realism, romanticism. If you're an art historian, this will feel very nice and familiar, and underlined the importance of nature in the American painting tradition. When we met with Kat, the ecologist, we would talk about cedar and hemlock and maple and moosewood. And, you know, I would sit and just kind of be amazed at what they were able to see and dissect, literally, in this picture. So Professor Collins asked Martha to ascertain the authenticity of the landscape represented. And as an art historian, something goes up your spine when you hear someone saying, is this authentic? Like, no representation is authentic. But an ecologist will look at you and say, well, you know, does this correspond to the species diversity that we would expect in Baxter State Park in the early part of the 19th century? We can find an answer to that question. And Martha went out to actually try to. Professor Collins asked her to wrestle with this question, so she researched historical data and found it on the species diversity in the region, in the period, and attempted to map this data onto specific areas of the painting. So she chose as her area of study this kind of blue triangle area, and ultimately deduced that the birch trees present on the far right likely gained a strong foothold in the region after a fire in 1803, which she illustrated with my favorite slide ever. Their prominent white trunks stand in contrast to the other greenery in the painting. I think we all learned a lot as a museum and as people who think about art from this exchange, and the study carried out by Professor Collins and her students situated the artwork as a source of data. Right? And indeed, many of the environmental scientists on our campus are really eager to explore the potential for works of art to provide information about the environment.